From now till 2050, you need almost 1,000 times increase in the production of SAF. I think from IATA we have brought that on different forums. And if you break that in terms of average plant size of 50 to 70,000 tons per annum, you need almost 300 plants per year.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. My guest today is Dr. Preeti Jain. Preeti is the head of Net Zero Transition Program at IATA, the International Air Transport Association. She's a scientist who has really got deep domain experience in India specifically. Someone who has a PhD and done more studies in biochemistry, someone who has worked in oil majors previously, like the Indian Oil Corporation. In India, she also was at LanzaTech as their global director. But now she is leading something that is critical for aviation to become more sustainable, which is the transition from existing jet fuels to sustainable aviation fuel. And Preeti and I deep dive into what is needed, what are the risks, and how we can overcome them. Interestingly, for the first time in 2 years, I have recorded part of this interview in Hindi, my mother tongue, and Preeti's too. So आज आपको सुन के बहुत खुशी होगी कि हमने थोड़ी सी conversations हिंदी में रिकॉर्ड करी हैं जो बिल्कुल एंड में है. So I hope if you get Hindi, you enjoy it. But most of the interview is in English with some India-specific details towards the end in Hindi. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Namaste, Preeti ji. The interesting thing is this will be the first interview we are doing, which we will record in English and in Hindi. So for our listeners, you'll have access to both the feeds. Welcome to the show and welcome to IATA and the world of aviation.
थैंक यू शशांक और धन्यवाद रादर आई शुड से धन्यवाद मुझे इस पॉडकास्ट पे लेने के लिए और यहाँ पे अपने विचार व्यक्त करने के लिए आई एम वेरी हैप्पी टू बी हियर एक्सट्रीमली डिलाइटेड to share my perspective on, topic of sustainable aviation fuel and what at IATA we are trying to do differently and for the benefit of industry.
Indeed. No, thank you so much. And just to let the listeners know, we are recording today on the 79th anniversary of the formation of IATA as an industry body that drives global agendas for the industry. And that's why this is so important. To have the conversation. 79 years now. What about the next 79 years?
I think I see pretty exciting time and staying close to our values of represent, lead and serve. And at IATA, we have these values where we champion global big picture. In last 79 years, if you see, we really have come a very long way. But that shouldn't stop us. There is a very long way when we look at our net zero aspirations, especially 2050, which I think every other day on different forums we see discussions, how we can really achieve that. So I see a very exciting time, not just for me, but for the youngsters and professionals who will be coming at IATA and in this sector.
Preeti ji, you are new to IATA, but you're not new to sustainable aviation fuels. You've got a long history in LanzaTech in India. Why don't you share with us a bit of a background on what makes you so well suited for this role to lead net zero and SAF at IATA?
Yeah, I think more than well suited, I will say I'm lucky to be here at IATA. That IATA leadership saw me as a potential, candidate to be here when it comes to our net zero programs. Yes, I served a very long part of my career based out of India, which I'm really proud of, looking at the, diversity of assignments in the net zero transitions and energy transition, especially focused on the energy justice which I was able to support and bring from my technology background as well as scientific background. To share, I think about myself, I'm a scientist by training. If I would have stayed there, I would have been in a research lab doing the experiments and helping technologies to evolve. But in the initial part of my career, I was given some good opportunities to work on the roadmap for autofill policy and air quality, where I worked with the policymakers. And that was the time when I realized, when you work on the policy making process, having translation of scientific process and scientific facts behind that is very important. For a policy making process, you need to translate the heavy language of science into simple language of policy actions. And I realized there is a lot of room to fill in that gap. And that's how, from a scientist, I moved into more of a policy advocacy and technology professionals, which is so far going well. And at IATA, I'm here as I mentioned, because sustainable aviation fuel, which industry is looking as one of the very significant lever. Because of my technology background, we are able to join forces within the IATA to see from the time the SAF projects are being announced, how we can really take these projects to the stage of completions, how the SAF availability can be increased, and more importantly, commercial readiness of these projects. What are the basically gaps when we take these projects from announcement stage to real production? So those are the gaps we have been trying to identify with our team here, and I have my team which have people from financing background and SAF specialists. So we are trying to fill that gap and help industry to meet its net zero aspirations, where SAF can be a biggest game changer.
Right. I'm really looking forward to understanding a lot more about this space. Now, you were, of course, recommended for this show by none other than Mary Owen Thompson, who I had previously as a guest, and she said, "You must talk to Preeti. You must speak with her because she knows SAF really well." Uh, One of the goals for IATA is driving industry policy. Driving cohesion and coordination across airlines. It's not just one airline versus the other. And
Yeah,
in that regard, I recall IATA recently released a report in which it compared the multiple net zero roadmaps from different
yeah,
agencies, independent boards like organizations like ICCT, and each of those have different colors showing how SAF is coming in, PTL, LCAF, demand reduction, carbon removals. What role will all of these play?
yeah.
Now, what can you tell us a little about that report and effort?
Yeah. So that report has been released by our Net Zero research team, which is a part of our total Net Zero energy transition program led by my colleague Hemant Mistry here at IATA. There are different stakeholders working in this space. And when all these stakeholders go to policymakers, sometimes those signals in terms of what could be the different levers can be a bit confusing, and that space can be a bit blurry. And you spoke about different colors, but if you blend all these colors, it is white, right? Scientifically, if you see. So essentially, in this report, we have been trying to bring all those colors together to show what are the real convergence of all these various pathways and what are the basically difference. What are their specific areas of all these roadmaps, and which are really focusing on the right true levers on the as far as SAF production expansion is required in the space. So essentially trying to identify what are the levers which are working in this roadmap and what are the key gaps so that we can see a clear picture. Are we in tandem with each other, or are we going totally across in different part of the room? So that is the key purpose to bring this report together for the benefit of industry.
Now, I completely hear you, but one look at the
Hmm.
chart and the
Hmm.
efforts seem fragmented. Now, I
Yeah.
know IATA cannot legally hold airlines responsible for, force anyone to do anything, but it seems fragmented. How do you bridge that gap? How do you
Yeah.
make the colors white?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I think it's important that we all sit together on the table. One is this report, but probably I think bringing all the stakeholders to sit on the table and we really start asking questions. What is our priority in the next 5 years? Knowing that, we don't have even 1% of SAF availability for the commercial aviation blending, and look at from a technology point of view as well as from a feedstock point of view. And then we look what we need in the next, midterm, and then we look into the long term. Probably we need to start looking at SAF from the near term, midterm, and long term picture, and then superimpose the feedstock availability as well as complementary technology aspect around it, and then probably draw our roadmaps. And then I'm sure you won't see all these colors going into different directions. They all should be converging very well together.
Fairly said. And I think it is a long journey. It requires a lot of people. Let's talk
Yeah.
about SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuels. What
Mm-hmm.
are some of the biggest challenges
Mm-hmm.
you feel or you see in driving production and also then adoption of sustainable aviation fuels?
Yeah, you talk about adoption, right? Let's talk about adoption first. In a simple economic terms, when I work, since I work in a sustainability and economics team, what drives innovation and what drives adoption of that innovation across the society? One is propensity of the people in terms of their economic resources, how much of disposable income is available with the people. But second, if that's not the case, and if the technology is very good in terms of ever innovation and has the potential to change the status quo in terms of energy availability, energy access, then the role of policies becomes very important. So that's what we have happened in many sectors, and we have examples in terms of road transport, technology, health sector. So let's talk about now the production part of it. Where as a coming someone coming from the technology background, I will say, let's take a step back, right? You have all the very strong demand signals, whether it is COP28 overarching framework or CAF3 framework, but then still production is not happening. So I think the biggest challenge, if you ask me, I'm looking at this space is demand signals are there, but supply is not able to keep the pace with the demand which is required in the market. But that cannot be the whole point for us to discuss. We need to dissect it further. Why the supply is not happening? Because I think we still don't have enough strong policies in the space incentivizing the production of SAF. There are definitely some regions where we are seeing the development, but it is not available across the regions consistently and uniformly. So you will see only HEFA as the biggest source of SAF available today. One is feedstock availability, second is technology maturity. But that shouldn't undermine the importance of other feedstock and other technology pathways which are qualified under ASTM. uh, what we see is there that in some cases, for example, let's take biomass and municipal solid waste. There is very strong missing links in terms of integration of those feedstocks, and then there are not many plants. And I often hear people saying, the capex is very high, the opex is very high, but we also need to understand that this capital intensity is going to come down as you're going to deploy more, but financing is not available. So there is, I think, mixed basket of challenges. One, on one hand, starting at your feedstock supply chains are not well integrated. Then you have only one or two plants, and that is not true representation of your capital intensity of this technology. And then you don't have enough support in terms of deployment of these technologies. So these are some of the challenges where financing is a missing link necessarily. We cannot just provide funding to few plants, three or four, and then say, oh, we don't have SAF production on the ground. So three or four production plants is not sufficient. And before this podcast, I did, a rough calculation at the back of envelope. From now till 2050, you need almost 1,000 times increase in the production of SAF. I think from IATA, we have brought that on different forums. And if you break that in terms of, average plant size of 50 to 70,000 tons per annum, you need almost 300 plants per year if we are going to build that distributed units of production across the globe. But I don't see even 100 plants of SAF coming across the world. So definitely that is the biggest challenge, how we mobilize and strengthen that supply chain with more production units. And
Wow, there's so much to dig deeper into this, right? I want to
yeah,
unpack this one by one. Let's talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
feedstocks.
yeah,
HEFA, you mentioned, is the most available type of SAF based on,
yeah.
feedstocks. How far can we stretch the definition of feedstock from country to country? Because I've heard everything from municipal waste to human waste as a feedstock. I was talking to someone in India who said I want to use sugarcane molasses and sugarcane waste as a feedstock. I was talking to someone in the Philippines who want to use coconuts as feedstock because the Philippines has lots of coconuts. In Malaysia, there is even demand for using palm oil as a feedstock. And we all know that to make palm oil, you have to clear rainforests to plant palm oil. So I'm very curious to see how palm oil can be classified as a sustainable feedstock. How far do we stress the definition of a sustainable feedstock that is relevant for making SAF, knowing that different countries, of course, have different strengths and different crops growing there?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and it has many dimensions to look into it. First and foremost, be it any feedstock or be it any country or be it any geography, having convergence with the sustainability criteria is very important and underlying aspect, because you're talking about sustainable aviation fuel. Whether at the starting point, if we are not factoring that sustainability metrics, how we can expect at the end product, right? What you are feeding in the system, what is we are going to have that product. That is the second part of it. Now coming to your questions, and so much complexities around biomass or this feedstock or sugarcane bagasse or even the HIFA feedstocks. I think to simplify it, we have to just step back and look into this feedstock into four ways. As a scientist, I always look into it. You have FIFA feedstock, right? You basically have fats, oil, greases. But there is only a certain limit to it. And, I struggle many times to still come up with a concrete number of global assessment of these fats, oil, greases available. And you must be surprised to do the number still ranges from 26 million ton to 40 million ton. So I was confused. What is the right number? And that is basically just fats, oil, and greases. When you look into the oil bearing feedstocks or the used cooking oil, the number people sometimes report between 70 to 80 million tons. And by the way, they are potential feedstock. So where does HIFA stops? What is the maximum limit? The maximum limit can be only a certain when we have a realistic assessment of how much of these feedstock are really available. Everybody talk about that these much of feedstock is available, but we don't have a uniform consensus that this is the number of feedstock. That is one part. Second, many times this HIFA feedstock is going for biodiesel production or renewable diesel production, as all of us know. If you ask me in one context, we are talking about P2L. To me, that is like going to moon. And second context, we are still want to stay with the biodiesel, which is not wrong. I'm sure there are economic parameters associated with that. So what is the right optimal use of this HIFA feedstock? So possibly, can we rationalize this feedstock for hard to decarbonize sector? There is around 5 billion liters of renewable diesel capacity around the world. Can we do a 15 to 20% swing of that capacity and have 1 billion liter for the SAF, which is hard to decarbonize sector and struggling? So then your one feedstock of fatty acid oil is taken care of. Now come your, alcohol A to J, which I see is a very promising technology. And the advantage there is the molasses, which you mentioned, sugarcane waste. We have technologies available today. May not be hundred of plants, but at least, couple of plants around the world, which take these feedstocks and convert that into a energy rich molecule, which is called alcohol. And then you can have alcohol to jet. But the next question comes, are we really looking at going beyond starch, going beyond corn, going beyond sugarcane, which is very energy intensive product, feedstocks, and in terms of sustainability, they may not qualify on all the aspects, not to discourage any sector, but we need to be very serious about it. And last but not the least, biomass and municipal solid waste or agri residue, where all of us agree there is a huge potential. But when I look at from a technology lens point of view, I think we need to start deploying more of those units using these base feedstocks and converting that into SAF, because still the capex intensity is pretty high for these technology. And when you look at this agri residue or biomass, the energy density of these feedstock is pretty low. So the conversion, one is capex very high, second energy density of this feedstock is very low. So the complexity of conversion again increases manyfold. And that complexity can only become brought down by deployment of more of these plants so that every time we deploy these units, we learn and next unit can be more efficient. So not a easy answer. We need to have more deployment of these technology based units.
Okay, fair enough. I see where the challenge is and I
Yeah.
see where things are going to come from.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for this? Because
Hmm.
there's a lot of cost to this. The last time when I spoke with Marie, she highlighted that oil companies are investing less than 1% of their profits
Yeah.
towards sustainability or greener fuels, and they should be the ones paying for it, or government should be the ones paying for it. I see it as idealistic and very hard to implement. Where is the money going to come from?
Yeah. But if I ask you back, where did the money came from the renewable sector? Till date, if you look in the last 1 decade, the renewable sector received almost 750 billion, of the grants in terms of incentives. Have you ever looked into where that money come from? Probably governments realize that there is a potential. There is a multiplier impact that this renewable sector or biomass sector can deliver, and there are socio-economic benefits. Probably we need to start looking into SAF or advanced biofuel with the same lens. I'm not saying we are not looking. We are definitely looking. But those, $1 billion of incentives providing to one system and second system, we are telling that please stand, dear technologies, please stand on your own. So that is not a right way to look into the sector. So I would say government need to be much more, play a very important role here to bring more incentives, and just having three or four plants and providing some funding for few plants is not enough. We need to build more momentum. And I come from energy company background. That's where I started my career. And I see in this whole scenario of who will bring the money, how the production cost will come down, the role of traditional energy companies is going to be very important because I do respect them a lot because of their expertise. They are running huge refineries around the world and petrochemical units. And when we are trying to look, at this technology deployment at scale, they are a very important stakeholder in this whole equation. So we need to join those forces together.
The more I think about this, the
Mhm.
more I feel that the financing is way higher than the typical angel investing or even venture capital levels. The
Yeah.
amounts we are talking about is 250 million per SAF plant, up to a trillion for large facilities, for example, to serve an entire nation. At that point, you are looking at governments and sovereign wealth funds to fund this. Do you believe that SAF and production of SAF can be a way of providing energy security to countries as well going forward?
Yeah. So, first of all, I think that this number of 250 million, which you're talking about for a typical SAF plant, we need to just look into the technology pieces into this process. For example, I take alcohol to jet, which are simple refining processes. Probably for the first plant, your cost may be 250 million. But when you're going to build more, or probably if you're going to integrate this plant within a refinery, kind of bolt on units, so probably that cost number may not be truly representative. That is one part of it.
Okay, so the question is about energy security. Do you believe that having SAF production facilities can provide countries with energy security?
Definitely, I do see SAF as a potential to offer energy security to these countries because we need to start look at the starting point. SAF is being produced by using different feedstocks, and many of these feedstocks are waste material like agri residue or biomass residue. And when I see, especially in context of emerging countries, like I'm coming from India, and we have Brazil, we have examples of many other Asian economies where this a lot of people are still engaged in the farming community, so these biomass and agri residue resources are available in plenty. And with the aid of technology today, they can be channelized in form of energy dense product, which you can use either for road transport or for aviation, which you were otherwise, either importing or driving from the fossil resources. So definitely, I think this has a great potential in terms of energy security and also substitution of carbon, which we are, as of today, driving from the fossil resources. if numbers are to be believed, I remember when I was working in India closely with the policymakers, the biomass potential which we saw at that point in time, if that can be channelized, the ethanol production in that economy itself can be doubled. So you can imagine how much of other biomass. But then we need to, simplify the puzzle of technology availability by deploy, deploy, deploy.
So we'll get to technology in a minute. Let's.
Yeah.
So I think we have ascertained that having SAF
Hmm.
production facilities in country are a source of energy security for governments, as well as helping grow sectors
Yeah.
like aviation and support them. So, what are some of the best tools from a government policy perspective that have worked? We've seen the carrot approach in the US with the IRA, lots of incentives, and that has boosted production of SAF. We have seen the stick approach in the EU and Europe, which has also driven adoption of sustainable aviation fuels.
Yeah.
What works better when it comes to serving aviation best?
Yeah. I think definitely government support is an underlying strong pillar of all this, dynamics, whether it is energy transition in terms of solar or whether it is SAF. When we look at US, definitely the IRA or LCFS, regulations in California are a great example to follow. How government can enable industry, an ecosystem to be built, and not only in terms of incentives that can be stacked, but I also like that concept, in terms of grants, which we see in US. You take a technology, and that I've seen in my previous technology stint. You take a technology from lab to pilot to pre-commercial, and then to commercial stage. And then with the aid of policy instrument, you provide incentives to take new technologies, at a large scale deployment. So that is something happening in US. We are already seeing. Europe, definitely, I think we are seeing a carrot approach, and we are sitting close to
You
the,
mean a stick? You mean a stick approach in Europe?
sorry, stick approach. Yeah, in Europe, we are definitely seeing a stick approach. Uh, yes, market-based mechanisms can play an effective role, but ultimately we see the role of incentives is very important, especially for the new technologies. So we hope somebody in the European government ecosystem is listening to this podcast, and we see some more incentives for SAF production apart from the mandate only.
Please allow me to push back on this one because we were
Yeah.
looking at the numbers while preparing for
Mm-hmm.
this interview, and my research team shared a statistic with me. So, the US, as we know, is all about incentives, Europe is a lot more stick. And what we see is airlines in Europe bought a lot more SAF and used it this year and
Mm-hmm.
last year than
Mm-hmm.
airlines in the US, which
Mm-hmm.
means what it goes to show is production in the US may be increasing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that airlines are buying SAF today to fly it, given,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the cost of SAF as well. Whereas in Europe, a lot more volume of SAF has flown till date than in the
Mm-hmm.
US. Does that mean incentives are not as strong for adoption as they are for production?
So we can see it from this point of view. Looks like both incentives as well as, the mandates are working in tandem, right? That's another way to look into it. And, I would say, I don't mean to say that one is right, other is wrong, but probably I think we need definitely a blended approach when it comes to both incentives as well as, because putting a mandate doesn't mean necessarily, the market creation will happen. You need to provide that initially, at least when the market is standing up trying to walk on their own, you need to provide that initial support in terms of incentives. So definitely a role, both have their own role to play.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well answered. Now, let's talk about adoption mechanisms, right? One of the realities of SAF today is there isn't enough supply to go around the world.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is if I went to the market today and I want to buy SAF, I can buy it from World Energy in Los Angeles, from Neste in Rotterdam or Singapore, and perhaps a couple more locations in the
Yeah.
entire world.
Yeah.
Given this inequity of supply globally,
Mm-hmm.
what is
Mm-hmm.
the role of book and claim? Do you foresee it playing a strong role where people can buy here and pay here and buy there, or pay here or use there?
Yeah, the topic is again very close to my heart. I'm a big believer of democratization of processes, and I look at book and claim necessarily for the audience. I think all of us know it's a basically accounting process to bring the robustness in terms of how each molecule of SAF is being accounted for. But more than that, I just, think it from this point of view. Can a simple farmer who is collecting agri residue somewhere in Africa or somewhere, a biofuel producer in Brazil with molasses, converting that to an ethanol, can that be a party of this whole SAF value chain we are talking about? You know, despite the fact that, there is no airline which is picking the fuel in Latin America or maybe in Africa, for example. So what is book and claim essentially is doing? It is basically, separating SAF as a physical molecule from the environmental attribute it is contributing. So book and claim is exactly doing that, where all airlines, doesn't matter, you have more financial muscle or you have low financial muscle, you are big or small, you can equally access this SAF production globally. And there are some regions which are abundant in feedstock. Nature has not given equal natural resources across the world. I always used to say in my one of the former company in Middle East, there are trees everywhere around the world. The only difference is some trees are above the ground, some trees are below the ground. That only makes a difference. Same is for SAF feedstock. And when you look into book and claim, which, our team at IATA is working very diligently, not in terms of just policy, but also trying to bring a integrated system around it, it gives a equal footing and equal opportunity to all airlines, and more importantly, stakeholders, not to be limited by the regional geography or regional, whether the airlines are there or not. So it's basically opening a market of SAF despite the regional limitations or the local aviation sector traffic limitations. So that's going to be a game changer if you ask me.
Right. No, I think I've seen promising work
Yeah,
coming from airlines and as well as technology providers
yeah,
around book and claim. So I'm
yeah,
curious to see how that goes.
yeah,
Um, how can the industry address the significant price premium of sustainable aviation fuel compared
yeah.
to conventional jet fuel? Because as it is, jet fuel is 30% of costs.
Mm-hmm,
Now you're
mm-hmm,
saying SAF is at 3x to 5x today.
mm-hmm.
How can an airline pay for it
Yeah,
if it at all
yeah,
intends to remain profitable?
yeah, yeah. Price is a function of supply and demand, right? We all know, simple, we all read about that. So the price of SAF, which we are seeing in the market today, I don't think that's a true reflection of SAF price in the time to be. And again, the renewable is a classic example in front of us. I remember as a college student, when I used to look into the renewable sector, the levelized cost of electricity that time was $0.50. And now we are seeing few cents, per unit of the electricity generation from renewable sector. So when we look at the SAF, same cost curve coming down, we have only handful of plants, as you said, the Nestes and World Bioenergies and Lanza Jets of the world. And so we don't have enough, supply of that fuel, and demand is more. So that's basically putting a pressure. So how you bring that price parity? One is definitely incentives. Second is again, going back to from where we started, deployment of these plants at scale so that we can have higher production and then we can have a more representative picture of supply and demand and let market forces then decide the price. And then we see really it is 5 times or it can be brought down to 2 times and subsequently brought at parity. Yeah.
Given that a green premium does exist, I think we can recognize
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who should be paying for this price premium? Do you believe that this difference should be passed on to the travelers? Do you think airlines should foot the bill? Who pays for this green premium?
That's interesting question, If you see as an airline, sector, we are already having a fuel bill as one of the largest contributor of our overall operating expenses. So before we say who should be fair, paying that bill, I must say we should be making effort that whether that price can of that fuel can be brought into the cost competitiveness, that cost competitiveness not to be brought in, need to be brought in, because ultimately it's a question of sustainability of the airlines. Our sustainability and margins, if you see as compared to the bid energy sector, they are already very small. And if we are going to pay that high premium for the fuel on which we need to, meet the aspirations of millions of flyers, it's very difficult for our sustainability. So I must say the policy to bring the cost down should be brought in to bridge for that price gap, so that we can have not only sustainable, but more importantly, cost effectiveness supply of SAF in the years to come. That's really my wish list, and I hope that will come true.
How are you at IATA making this wish come true? Are you working with governments or policymakers to make favorable policies for airlines in this matter?
Yeah, so policy has a very important role. I think that is an underlying fact which we all recognize. So at IATA, under sustainability and economics team, which is led by Mari, we have policy divisions who work with the governments across the world. Intention is definitely same across the world to have SAF with policies, but sometimes the policy language can be pretty diverse. How we bring that harmonious alignment into those policy in terms of understanding, that's something our team is doing, our policy team is doing at IATA. In terms of a net zero program team, which I'm heading at IATA, we are also trying to understand the commercial readiness of all these SAF projects which are being announced. And we are also doing technology profiling to really see, in terms of policy effectiveness, which technologies are really being deployed at scale and where we are still seeing the missing gap. Feedstock potential may be pretty high, as we discuss on biomass and municipal solid waste or even all the other waste, but deployment of technology is not happening. So that is something, that's a gap we are trying to build. The other interesting thing, which is definitely is in our wish list, is, if we come together as in collaboration, and collaborate on the SAF part, we think the success is pretty high, can be pretty high. And that is the space we are trying to create, to build a space where all the stakeholders can come together. When I say all the stakeholders, can we create a platform, to accelerate SAF production in terms of bringing the financing community, bringing the technology community. And as an airline industry, we have a big stakeholder already within our IATA umbrella, and bringing them all together. That's something we have been trying to see and foster.
So, what does success look like for you and your team then? Do you have some examples that you can share?
I think that overarching level, I see meeting 2050 aspirations with the support of government policies, and industry has that SAF production. The other thing which I see success lies is, can we really unlock the low-hanging fruit? When I say low-hanging fruit is, can we really revisit and look mobility as one sector, which many economies are really looking at, and start looking at what are really hard to decarbonize sector? Can we really do feedstock, rationalization for those sector first? That is a low-hanging fruit, and renewable diesel and SAF is a classic example. Other thing I feel is time is an essence. And coming from a refining background, I don't mean that energy industry shouldn't deploy new technologies, but as an industry, the time is ticking for us as an aviation industry. And refineries are already, there are around 700 to 800 refineries around the world. And many of these refineries have the infrastructure and capability in terms of diesel hydrotreating or kerosene hydrotreating, and they can do co-processing. So in the meantime, when in a time frame of 4 to 5 years, you are having all these ASTM qualified pathways deployment at scale, can within a time frame of 1 to 2 years, existing refineries, if not all 800 of them, at least few hundred of them, the big capacity refineries, can they do co-processing? Can we start looking into policies which can help rationalization and diversion of feedstock to these energy companies and expand SAF? That is definitely is my wish list, and I think that can be really something which we can achieve as an industry.
That is a really good vision, because you're not waiting to build new factories or new refineries to make SAF. Two questions on that.
Yeah.
The first is, if you're telling an existing refinery, hey, dedicate 10% of your time to make SAF, but if the other 90% of the time it is the refinery is producing goods that are, one, more profitable, and second, easier to sell than to one or two airlines, why would they dedicate it even 10% of the capacity there?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. By the way, it's not 10%. Co-processing allows 5% of, processing of fats or increases, just to correct there. Yeah. So where is the incentive for refinery? That's your question. I think that incentive for refineries, first of all, in terms of that ready market, which is available out there, that is the basically market available, and that market requires sustainable aviation fuel. And from refinery point of view, I think it's not going to be a huge investment in terms of making changes. As I said, diesel hydrotreating capacity is already there, and kerosene hydrotreating capacity is there, and there are technology, companies, I don't want to take the name, so that can be done. But again, who will pay for that, product of the price? That's what I think you're trying to see. Again, going back to policies, can really policies, incentivize that production so that refiners are really motivated to make that switch? Because energy transition is not question about aviation industry. I think refiners are also looking at making energy transitions in and integrated energy solutions. So in their product basket, can they also increase that SAF production or biofuel production to the greater limits? So that's how I think I'm looking into all this space together.
I need to unpack this as well.
Yeah,
You mentioned that there's ready demand, right?
yeah,
That these refineries can be convinced to share 5% of the capacity. But a question,
yeah.
is there
Mm-hmm,
ready demand? Because the thing is,
mm-hmm,
I've seen in the data, we've seen even a large European carrier
mm-hmm.
used less SAF in 2023 than they used in 2022.
Yeah.
I spoke to recently an airline executive in India, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
"Shashank, I don't need to buy SAF because my government doesn't mandate it for me. My customers sort by price, and I have no incentives like in the US. So why do I need SAF today? When I get there, I will get it." So is there enough demand today? And are there decent demand signals? Because airlines aren't really buying SAF right now because they're not being forced to.
Yeah, I think I don't agree with that, position that airlines are not really buying it. Because if you look at the data and we track numbers very carefully, I'm not talking about offtake commitments, I'm talking about uptake. More than 40 airlines have committed for uptake, and some of them are already started. So numbers doesn't show that they are not buying it. But many times we get the questions, airline coming to us and telling we are interested to buy, but we don't have SAF availability. Rather, I heard many times, there are offtake agreements, but still there is more, demand than the supply. So all the airlines are not able to have it. So it's not question that airlines are not ready to buy it. It's again, I think, the question of having that supply.
Fair enough.
And
I
we
think
can
this
we
is
can we can we can go through the
yeah,
numbers again to say
yeah, I think
I
this
don't
is
want to.
no, this is fine. This is it's see, you're the right person to talk about this, right? Because I
Yeah,
can talk to an individual airline, but you of course have an industry
yeah,
wide
yeah,
overview on this. And I think we have to admit we are on a journey here
yes,
globally to
yeah,
drive adoption and demand signals driving production.
yeah,
It's economics.
yes,
It's not all ceteris paribus in the real world, isn't it?
yes,
So
yes,
we have to deal with the realities here of the industry.
yeah,
uh,
yes.
you have of course come from outside of aviation, so I'm
Hmm.
curious what lessons can be learned from the adoption curves of other
Yeah.
alternative fuels in sectors like ground transportation, and what have you seen in your experience outside of aviation that
Yeah.
gives you hope?
That's a pretty interesting question. When I started my career within a oil company back in India in 2003, that was a time that India started looking into ethanol blending program. So that was my, understanding how ethanol can be a big success. And today we know that it's a third largest producer and also a very active player around the world in terms of biofuels. And so, what can be learned? I think I clearly saw convergence of technology readiness, research, and innovation coming together so that one technology can be deployed. The other interesting thing which I saw in terms of many emerging economy, be it Brazil, be it India, be it other parts of the world, the support of policy not in terms of making that fuel is available, but also ensuring that infrastructure is also ready. So regulatory basically framework accelerated the deployment of these alternative fuels in the road transport. And very important part, which sometimes we don't see in all the transition spaces, how customer is perceiving that, bringing that sustainability and an environment aspect and that picture in front of the customer, so that at the end of the day we are serving customer here, be it aviation or be it road transport, and how that customer is also a party to it. So that adoption curve, which when I saw in the road transport for, I see regulatory space and policy was with big drivers, while ensuring that the fuel is available. It shouldn't happen that I start a program and after 6 months the fuel availability is not happening in the system, and whether my infrastructure is also ready to handle that kind of traffic. So yeah, so it was a very stepwise and collective approach.
Well, I think collective approach is what IATA is about. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to see lots more results of the approach. And now that you're added to the
Yeah.
team and the team that Marie is building, it's quite encouraging to see. One final question. A lot of the work I have done in the last 16 years with airlines
Mm-hmm.
is on the consumer end and passenger end. And when it comes to passengers, trust is extremely important. Currently, most passengers don't know what is SAF. If you just mention it to a passenger, they wouldn't know what is SAF. Just like if you ask them, what is the brand of the engine that's flying under this wing? They wouldn't know, right? What do airlines need to do when it
Yeah.
comes to building trust about their sustainability initiatives?
Yeah. As you rightly said, I'm not from this sector, but when now I can say I'm like 2 months into IATA, and I can see that our airline members have a very clear and very sharp strategy to make sure that the customer is on board, what they are doing in terms of SAFs. When I look into United's or Lufthansa's and IAG's of the world, and I started going to their websites, you can see they are trying to create an awareness in terms of what is SAF all about, how the Corsia framework may not be very easy for common customer to understand, but how environmental attribute of SAF or the sustainability aspect of SAF helping them to meet the net zero picture. So they are already on a campaign to educate customer and create awareness around it. And not only that, some airlines are going a step further, allowing customer and giving them flexibility to have these green products. Well, when you're buying a ticket, most of us see how much of the CO2 emissions of a flight is going to create. And then telling them, okay, the choice is yours. If you want to, make sure you're contributing to environment, would you like to participate in our SAF programs or would like to pay for your SAF, blending in the flight you are taking? So I think those kinds of flexibility these airlines are trying to build in and create more and more, awareness around customers. So they are a party to it. Yeah. And
Well,
I have
you go ahead.
seen, last point I would say is I have seen when you bring environment in the public eye, the change is destined to happen. And the aviation sector, we are seeing that start has already been made.
Well, I'm hopeful. I am
Same
full
here.
of hope. This podcast is an optimistic one, and it's looking
Yeah.
at solutions and trying to see how innovators like yourself are overcoming challenges for the whole
Yeah.
industry. I've truly enjoyed this conversation, Preeti ji,
Same
and
here.
I really wish you all the best in this new role, and truly hope that IATA achieves its vision of making aviation sustainable.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion, and together, definitely, we can solve the problems.
Preeti ji, the final part of this interview is what I call the rapid fire round. It is inspired from Coffee with Karan. I have to be
Okay.
completely honest, and I don't think most people on who listen to this podcast would know about it, but you probably would. So
Okay.
in this, I will ask you a simple question, and you can give me a
Mhm.
very simple answer. Like, what's your favorite airline?
So I would say this industry is new to me. I don't have any preference. But one thing I really admire about airlines is when I see airline and its staff in the flight and seeing them in a very comfortable attire, comfortable shoes, especially. So I really feel that you're taking care of your staff, and especially on a very long flight, rather than keeping them on high heels. So making sure that your staff is very comfortable on these flights, I really like, because and then you can guess the name of airlines, who are taking some new initiatives and
Tell me which one. Does
steps.
anyone come to your mind?
I remember there is one in India. You can Google about them and see the how their
you're
staff is
maintaining
dressed.
you're
And
maintaining your IATA neutrality here. I see.
yes. Probably I'm
Okay.
inspiring all other airlines to make sure that next time they see their staff is not standing on a 4 or 5 inches heel, but much more
Yeah.
comfortable manner. Yeah.
Yep. What's your favorite book?
Okay, it's not just one book. I like two kind of books. So one is definitely you will probably chuckle. I like stories of Panchtantra, which is basically as a child we used to read for, but still I read sometime as a bedside reading. For me, they are not just stories about animals and a dialogue between animal and humans or fables. For me, they are very powerful lessons, how we should always be curious as a child, first of all. And second, how human values and ethos are important in our life. In the quest of bigger things of life, billion, million dollars out there, we shouldn't miss out on the simple things of life. So I really enjoy that. And second, I'm a big fan of poetry. So I like reading Gulzar or many, old Hindi poet like Bachchan Saab, or maybe Sohanlal Dwivedi is also one of my favorite. Yeah. So.
Okay, well, Hindi literature it is indeed. Then, what's your favorite
Yeah.
city?
That's interesting. I think every city is unique in terms of what it offers to me, but I really enjoy my time being in Washington, D.C. Maybe as a consultant, I used to be there, and DC used to be my home for 1 or 2 months. I really enjoy being there on my own, exploring the city. It has a lot
Nice.
to offer. Yeah.
Okay, well, Washington
Yeah.
DC. I think this is the first time on this show someone has mentioned DC as a favorite city, but
Yeah.
we'll take
Yeah.
that. What's your
Yeah.
favorite movie?
Tuesday with Maury. I can watch it many times, and every time I watch it, I start crying, making me think, do I really need to be in corporate world, or do I start go back and do a more social work?
Well,
So
I think you can be kind and honest and speak the truth in the corporate world, and it will be better as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
right?
yeah, true.
What is something you would like to learn?
So I want to learn kayaking. I thought through, about this question a lot. That is something I always on my mind. And when I learn it, I want to be in a clear glass bottom, kayak boat, and be on my own in mid of waters and just enjoy my time there. That is
Well,
something on my list.
you're in Switzerland now, so perfect time.
Yes, I know Zurich is a place to go. So next time soon I will be there.
Or start in Lake Geneva next to the fountain.
Okay, I need to find those lessons there for sure. Thank you.
Exactly. What do you do in your free time?
I practice yoga. I'm a certified yoga teacher as well as practitioner for almost a decade. So that is something I really like. It helps me stay connected with my inner self and meeting my
Okay.
friends. Yeah.
And may I suggest then potentially leading some yoga sessions at the IATA headquarters in that very famous meeting room with the view of the Geneva tarmac that I've had the privilege of delivering workshops in a few times. That would be an amazing yoga studio.
Yeah, so come next time we can plan some.
Absolutely. What is the best advice you have received?
So the best advice which still stays with me is believe in yourself. Rest everything will find it. Sorry, I speak again. Believe in yourself. Rest everything will fall in place. That still stays with me.
Okay, fantastic. Well, on that very positive note, let us end this interview. Thank you once again, Preeti ji. It has been a pleasure speaking. And for those who would like to listen on and who understand Hindi, the Hindi version follows right after this. मुझे बहुत मज़ा आ रहा है बिकॉज 2 साल में पहली बार मैं हिंदी में रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा हूँ और मैं बहुत लोगों से पूछ सका हूँ प्लीज़ आप हिंदी में रिकॉर्ड करेंगे आधे लोगों को आती नहीं है और जिनको आती है वो बात करने में डरते हैं सो आई थॉट व्हाई नॉट लेट्स स्टार्ट प्रीति जी थैंक यू वेरी मच बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया कि आप मानी हिंदी में इंटरव्यू करने के लिए
ये शुक्रिया इनफैक्ट मेरी तरफ से भी आपको मुझे पूछने के लिए कि मैं हिंदी में इंटरव्यू देना चाहूँगी क्योंकि आई थिंक ये जो हम वार्तालाप बायोफ्यूल्स को लेके कर रहे हैं ये एक बहुत बड़ी ऑडियंस तक करोड़ों लोगों तक पहुंचना चाहिए और भारत जैसे देश में जहाँ पे हिंदी एक राष्ट्रभाषा है आई थिंक हम एक बड़े लंबे एक जनता को ये हम अपना मैसेज पहुंचा सकते हैं तो थैंक यू
बिल्कुल लेट्स मेक दिस रियल जब मैं दिल्ली में बड़ा हो रहा था तब मुझे याद है करोल बाग में एक कोने में गन्ने के जूस की दुकान थी जब भी हम वहां जाते थे गन्ने का जूस मैं जिद करके पीता था और नींबू और मसाला डाल के जितना ही मन करो उसका फिर गंडेरी भी मिलती थी साथ में मुझे ये जान के बहुत खुशी हुई कि ये जो गन्ने का जूस है और जो गन्ने का जो बाकी हस्क वगैरह बचता है जो फेंकते हैं उनसे प्लेन्स उड़ सकते हैं। ऐसा
बिल्कुल।
कैसे हो सकता है?
पहली बात तो बड़ा ही दिलचस्प सवाल है और मुझे भी वापस दिल्ली की गलियों में ले गया आपका सवाल, क्योंकि मैं वहीं से ही हूँ। यू नो इससे पहले कि हम गन्ने के बारे में और गन्ने के रस के बारे में बात करें, हमें ये भी पता है दोनों को, क्योंकि भारत एक कृषि प्रधान देश है और गन्ना एक नकदी फसल है जिसमें भारत दूसरे नंबर पे विश्व भर में आता है। और गन्ने के रस की और दिल्ली की गर्मियों की एक बहुत ही बढ़िया जुगलबंदी है। जो दिल्ली में रहता है वो उस जुगलबंदी को जानता है।
बिल्कुल,
लेकिन
बहुत अच्छे से।
गन जी, जी। गन्ने का रस की जुगलबंदी और गन्ने से बचने वाले जो अवशेष हैं, उनकी जुगलबंदी एक बड़े ही नए आयाम पे जा सकती है। वो आयाम है सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल। अब आप पूछेंगे कैसे, या हमारे सुनने वाले जो श्रोता हैं वो पूछेंगे कैसे? तो अगर मैं जब गन्ने को देखती हूँ तो गन्ना एक ऐसी फसल है जिसका कोई भी पार्ट जो है, भाग है, वो वेस्ट नहीं है। चाहे आप गन्ने का रस पीजिए, चाहे उस गन्ने के रस से चीनी बनाइए जिसमें भारत नंबर 1 स्थान पे आता है विश्व भर में, या फिर उसके बाद आपके पास बगैस बच जाता है या मोलासिस बच जाता है। तो अगर हम भारत की पॉलिसी को, नीति को देखें तो मोलासिस से एथेनॉल बनाया जा सकता है। तो यही नहीं, बगैस आज की तारीख में मैं देखूं भारत को तो बगैस से ऊर्जा का उत्पादन भी होता है, बिजली का सह उत्पादन होता है। लेकिन इसी बगैस को आप नई तकनीकी विकास की वजह से और नई तकनीकियों टेक्नोलॉजीज के साथ एथेनॉल में भी कन्वर्ट कर सकते हैं, बदल सकते हैं। तो एक कहावत है ना, हम बोलते हैं आम के आम और गुठलियों के भी दाम। तो गन्ना बिल्कुल वैसी फसल है जिससे आप एथेनॉल बना सकते हैं। और गन्ने के अनेक विभिन्न रूपों से आप एथेनॉल बना सकते हैं। अब एथेनॉल बन गया जिसका सड़क यातायात में उपयोग भी हो रहा है, गैसोलीन ब्लेंडिंग में। लेकिन उसके अलावा टेक्नोलॉजी एक बड़े ही ऊंचे आयाम पे चली गई है, जहाँ पे ASTM 7566 ये एक मानक है बेसिकली कि किस तरह का ईंधन जहाजों में इस्तेमाल होना चाहिए। उसके अंतर्गत एक प्रक्रिया होती है अल्कोहल टू जेट। तो उससे आप एथेनॉल से आप सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल बना सकते हैं। और मज़े की बात यह है कि ना आपको जहाज बदलने की ज़रूरत, ना आपको पाइपलाइन बदलने की ज़रूरत, ना आपको स्टोरेज बदलने की ज़रूरत। आप उसी एग्जिस्टिंग इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में इसको इस्तेमाल करके अप टू 50% तक, 50% तक जहाज़ों में मिला सकते हैं, जहाज के फ्यूल में, और जहाज उड़ा सकते हैं। तो अगली बार मेरी सलाह ये है कि जब दिल्ली में आप गन्ने का रस पिएं तो सोचिए उस गिलास को देख के, इससे जहाज भी उड़ाया जा सकता है।
बहुत ही बढ़िया। आपने कपिल शर्मा को मात दे दी शुद्ध हिंदी में। मजा आ गया सुन के आपका जवाब।
चलिए।
लेकिन मुझे ये बताइए, मैं आज थोड़ी रिसर्च कर रहा था इस इंटरव्यू के लिए, और
हम्म,
मैंने ये जाना कि जो भारत की एयरलाइंस हैं,
हम्म,
उन्होंने 1,000 से ज्यादा हवाई जहाज ऑर्डर किए हुए हैं अभी, पिछले एक साल में, पिछले 12 महीनों में। जितने हवाई जहाज भारत में आने वाले हैं अगले 25 सालों में, उतने पूरी दुनिया की एयरलाइंस कंबाइन करके भी नहीं ला सकती हैं। इतने
हम्म।
सारे हवाई जहाज आने वाले हैं। क्या हम गन्ने के मोलासिस से इतना ईंधन बना सकते हैं कि ये सारे हवाई जहाज उड़ सके?
अ, बहुत ही बढ़िया और बहुत ही लाजवाब प्रश्न है जिसके लिए आप मशहूर हैं, बाय द वे शशांक जी। पहली बात तो ये, मुझे आपका नहीं पता, लेकिन जब मैं बचपन में टीवी देखती थी तो एक ऐड आती थी, बुलंद भारत की बुलंद तस्वीर। तो जब मैंने ये
मेरे को तो ट्यून
घटनाक्रम
भी याद
पढ़ा
आ रही है, ये बजाज का था शायद, या
जी, जी,
है
जी।
ना?
तो जब मैंने ये निर्णय पढ़ा कि 1000 से ऊपर जहाज खरीदे जा रहे हैं, एक बार तो मैं भी आश्चर्यचकित थी और एक गर्व की फीलिंग भी आती है आपके अंदर की, लेकिन आई थिंक हम वो नए भारत की तस्वीर दे रहे हैं जो देख रहे हैं, और आई थिंक उसका साक्षी हैं कि युवा भारत, आर्थिक विकास के पथ पे बढ़ता भारत, जहाँ पे अगर मैं पिछले साल के आंकड़े देखूं, केवल 15 करोड़ लोग घरेलू यात्री थे। और इसका मतलब है 125 करोड़ के देश में 1000 जो जहाज जिनकी आप और मैं बात कर रहे हैं, ये बहुत ही एक छोटा नंबर है। तो डेफिनेटली आई थिंक ये बहुत बड़ा एक बाजार है जहाँ पे आर्थिक विकास और हवाई यातायात को एक आम जनता तक लेकर जाने की एक मार्केट में जरूरत है। लेकिन अब रही बात सैफ की, तो सैफ की एक बड़ी एक और रोचक बात है कि सिर्फ गन्ना नहीं या गन्ने के अलग भाग नहीं, आप किसी भी तरह का बायोबेस फीडस्टॉक लेके, या फिर बेकार कूड़ा कचरा, बची हुई फसलों के अवशेष लेके, उनसे भी आप बायोफ्यूल्स और सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल बना सकते हैं। और आज की डेट में भले ये प्लांट्स इंडिया में ना हो या फिर हर अलग अलग विश्व के भागों में ना हो, लेकिन टेक्नोलॉजी विज्ञान आज उपलब्ध है हमें क्या चाहिए? हमें चाहिए एक समन्वय नीति के साथ, उसके साथ आप किस तरह से वित्त या फिर जिसे कहते हैं फाइनेंशियल इंसेंटिव्स प्रोवाइड करें। तो ये एक बड़े स्तर पे एथेनॉल का प्रोडक्शन करा जा सकता है। एक समन्वय और एक नीति पथ पे हमें बढ़ने की ज़रूरत है। मैंने भारत में देखा है पिछले 5-7 साल में प्राइम मिनिस्टर जीवन योजना, एक अक्सर हम बोलते हैं प्रधानमंत्री जीवन योजना, और अगर मैं उसके बारे में आपको नाम बताऊं तो इसका मतलब है प्रधानमंत्री जैव ईंधन वातावरण अनुकूल फसल अवशेष निर्वाण योजना।
इसके बारे में मैंने बिल्कुल नहीं सुना था।
अरे ये इस योजना ने आई थिंक अगर मैं देखूं तो बायोफ्यूल्स के जगत में एक बड़े नए रास्ते खोले हैं। और अगर हम सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल को देखते हैं और इसी तरह की योजनाएं सम्मिलित की जाती हैं, बनाई जा सकती हैं, तो मुझे कोई शक नहीं है कि हम सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल ना केवल भारत में देखें, बल्कि भारत दूसरे देशों में भी उस सस्टेनेबल फ्यूल का निर्यात करे।
इस बात से मेरे दिमाग में दो चीज़ें आती हैं। एक तो
जी।
एक थोड़ा कंपैरिजन करते हैं। हमने 1000 नए हवाई जहाज़ों की बात करी, और
हम्म।
ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल कितना है, अभी कितना आगे जाना
जी।
है भारत को।
जी। हम्म।
जस्ट एज अ कंपैरिजन, यूएस में जो यूनाइटेड एयरलाइंस है,
हम्म।
उस एयरलाइन अकेले के पास 950 प्लेन्स हैं।
हम्म।
यहाँ पे हम पूरे देश की बात कर रहे हैं।
जी।
सो डेफिनेटली ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल काफ़ी है।
हम्म।
लेकिन दूसरी बात ये है, आपने बोला कि 1% ऑफ इंडियंस फ्लाई करंटली
हम्म।
डोमेस्टिकली ना, आपने जो परसेंटेज शेयर करी थी।
नहीं, 1% नहीं, 15 करोड़ आप लगा लीजिए, 125 करोड़ में 1% तो नहीं बनेगा।
1 से ज़्यादा, 10%।
10%
डोमेस्टिक, हाँ आपने डोमेस्टिक कहा था,
या
बिल्कुल सही कहा।
डोमेस्टिक डोमेस्टिक।
लेकिन अगर हमारे पास इतना ही वेस्ट प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, गन्ने के आप हस्क ले लीजिए या
जी। जी।
कूड़ा ले
जी।
लीजिए, कुछ भी ले लीजिए जिससे एथनॉल बन रहा है, क्या वो थोड़े लोगों के उड़ने के लिए यूज होना चाहिए, या ज्यादा लोगों के साथ जो जो चीज ज्यादा लोगों को बेनिफिट करे उनके लिए यूज होनी चाहिए, जैसे कि ट्रक का ईंधन। इंडिया
हम्म।
में ट्रकिंग होती है बहुत, आपका माल इधर से उधर जाता है, वो माल बहुत लोगों को पहुंचता है।
हम्म।
15 से बहुत ज्यादा, 15 से 25-30 करोड़ लोगों को हर हफ्ते पहुंचता होगा। तो
हम्म।
एक्विटेबल एक्सेस ऑफ फ्यूल का एक हम सवाल करते हैं, तो उसमें आपका क्या क्या राय है?
यो उम्दा नजरिया है इक्विटेबल एक्सेस को देखने का या फिर सड़क परिवहन को देखने का। लेकिन मैं एक स्टेप पीछे जाती हूँ, एक कदम पीछे की तरफ जाती हूँ। अगर आप नेट जीरो टारगेट देखें आज की तारीख में, चाहे वो सड़क परिवहन है, चाहे वो हवाई परिवहन यातायात है, तो सभी का एक लक्ष्य है कि किस तरह से हम अपने कार्बन के उत्सर्जन को और कार्बन की तीव्रता को, जिसको कार्बन इंटेंसिटी बोलते हैं, कम कर सकें। तो हैवी ड्यूटी ट्रक्स की मैं बात करूं या हैवी ड्यूटी व्हीकल्स की मैं बात करूं, उनके पास सिर्फ बायोफ्यूल नहीं, और भी बहुत सारे ऑप्शंस हैं। बायो गैशियस फ्यूल्स हैं, या फिर हाइड्रोजन है, या फिर एलएनजी है। लेकिन मैं अगर हवाई यातायात की बात करूं, और आईटा में हमने एक एनालिसिस भी किया है कि अगर एविएशन सेक्टर से आपको कार्बन उत्सर्जन 2050 तक नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य प्राप्त करना है, तो लगभग 65%, 65% का जो उसमें शेयर होगी, भागीदारी होगी, वो सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल की होगी। तो हमें ना केवल इस क्षेत्र का एक भागीदार होने की वजह से की तरह से, बल्कि एक नीति के तरफ से भी, नीति के लेंस से अगर मैं देखूं तो ये देखना चाहिए मेरे फीड स्टॉक की कहाँ पे जरूरत है, कौन सा ऐसा क्षेत्र है जहाँ पे कार्बन उत्सर्जन को कम करना मुश्किल है। और हम एक वर्ड यूज करते हैं, हार्ड टू एबेट सेक्टर। सो एविएशन एक हार्ड टू एबेट सेक्टर है, जहाँ पे सैफ के अलावा कोई और बड़ी चॉइस नहीं है। एनर्जी एफिशिएंसी है, ऑपरेशनल एफिशिएंसी है, बट एक लिमिटेड एक्सटेंट तक, या फिर हाइड्रोजन से प्लेन है। मुझे नहीं लगता आप एग्री करेंगे, मुझे पता है कि आप बहुत ज़्यादा हवाई यातायात से इधर-उधर जाते हैं, अक्सर लोग आपको बुलाते हैं। मगर आप क्या कह सकते हैं कि कब आप हाइड्रोजन के जहाज में बैठने वाले हैं? सो
मुश्किल है, बहुत मुश्किल है,
जी।
स्पेशली अगर हम देखें कि क्या ग्रोथ चल रही है,
जी।
किस तेजी से हवाई यातायात बढ़ रहा है,
जी।
और उसको अगर हम मद्देनजर रखें कि अच्छा तो फिर इलेक्ट्रिक प्लेन्स कब आएंगे या हाइड्रोजन प्लेन्स कब आएंगे, जब भी आएंगे वो इतने कम लोगों को लेके जाएंगे कि
जी।
ज्यादातर आप सैफ पावर्ड प्लेन्स पे चल रहे होंगे, सस्टेनेबल
हुँ।
एविएशन फ्यूल्स। इसलिए जितना ज्यादा बन सके उतना इंपॉर्टेंट।
जी।
एक
जी।
और चीज आती है, अगर हम इक्विटी की बात करें,
हुँ, हुँ।
कुछ महीने तक
हुँ,
पूरी दुनिया में 80% सैफ जो था वो कैलिफोर्निया में था,
हुँ। हुँ,
अमेरिका में। और जो बाकी था वो 2-3 जगह पाया जाता था कि नेदरलैंड, सिंगापुर, 2-3 जगह बस।
हम्म,
जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज हैं,
जी।
जैसे कि इंडिया हो गया, इंडोनेशिया हो गया, टर्की हो गया, या ग्रोथ कंट्रीज, फिलीपींस मान लीजिए, अफ्रीका, लैटिन अमेरिकन कंट्रीज, यहाँ कोई सैफ प्लांट है ही नहीं।
हम्म।
क्या आपको लगता है कि भारत जैसे देश या इंडोनेशिया, फिलीपींस, ब्राजील, ऐसे देशों में सैफ का इतना उत्पादन हो सकता है कि ना सिर्फ वो अपने एयरलाइंस के लिए सैफ बना सके, बट वो एक्सपोर्ट भी कर सके? और अगर हो सकता है तो क्या चाहिए, आयाटा किस तरह से हेल्प कर रहा है?
यू नो आपका प्रश्न मैं एक बार दोबारा से सोच रही हूँ कि सिर्फ हम इसे डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज बोलें या उभरती अर्थव्यवस्थाएं बोलें, तो उभरती अर्थव्यवस्थाएं मैं बिल्कुल बोलूंगी, क्योंकि इन अर्थव्यवस्थाओं का बहुत पोटेंशियल है। आइटा क्या रोल प्ले कर रहा है? आइटा बहुत ही मैं ये बोल सकती हूँ, इस क्षेत्र को बड़ी बारीकी से देख रहा है। क्या इस क्षेत्र में नए अवसर हैं, क्या अपॉर्चुनिटीज हैं, और किस तरह से ये उभरती अर्थव्यवस्थाएं सैफ का प्रोडक्शन बढ़ा सकती हैं। इस सब में हमें दो तीन चीजें समझने की जरूरत है। पहली चीज तो ये कि सैफ का फीड स्टॉक, जो लगभग 60 से 70% सैफ की कॉस्ट में भागीदारी करता है। दूसरा, टेक्नोलॉजी का रोल। आज की डेट में अगर मैं इन टेक्नोलॉजीज को देखूं, उनका कैपेक्स देखूं, तो इन टेक्नोलॉजीज की जो बहुत पूंजी निवेश जो इन टेक्नोलॉजीज में है, वो बहुत ज्यादा पूंजी निवेश है। तो उन उस पूंजी निवेश को लेके क्या हम एक तरह का सरकारों के द्वारा या फिर ग्लोबल लेवल के ऊपर, क्या देश एक दूसरे के साथ इन तकनीक टेक्नोलॉजी कोलैबोरेशन कर सकते हैं, साझा कर सकते हैं? और तीसरा इम्पोर्टेंट जो रोल यहाँ पे प्ले करता है, वो ये करता है कि क्या सैफ के लिए इतनी बड़ी मार्केट है? सो इन तीनों का आंसर हम एज एन आइटा उसको देखने की हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं। पहली चीज ये कि हम अलग अलग देशों में सरकारों के साथ काम कर रहे हैं कि किस तरह सरकार पहले कुछ प्लांट्स के लिए फाइनेंसिंग या फिर वित्तीय सहायता उपलब्ध कराए, ताकि इन प्लांट्स को लगाया जा सके। और जब मार्केट और प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लेयर जिसे बोलते हैं, पूंजीवादी, जब देखें कि वाकई में इसमें तो मुनाफा है, तो मैं क्यों ना इसमें अपना पैसा डालूं। तो सरकार की मनी जहाँ जाती है, प्राइवेट सेक्टर की मनी भी वहां पे फ्लो होती है। हाँ, और हम सरकारों के साथ इस विषय पे अलग अलग देशों में काम करें, ताकि पॉलिसीज कैसे सपोर्ट करें। दूसरा आता है फीड स्टॉक। फीड स्टॉक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, लेकिन फीड स्टॉक की सप्लाई चेन्स इन सभी देशों में उपलब्ध नहीं। तो किस तरह से आपकी जो वित्तीय जो खांचा है, किस तरह से इन सब सप्लाई चेन्स को सुदृढ़ बना सके, हम उस पे काम कर रहे हैं। और तीसरी चीज, ये जरूरी नहीं कि जहाँ पे आप सैफ बनाए वहां पे उसकी मार्केट भी हो। तो एक सैफ को आप जब आप प्लेन में मिलाते हैं, तो उसके एनवायरमेंटल बेनिफिट्स को ट्रैक करने के लिए एक प्रोसेस होता है, उसे प्रक्रिया को बोलते हैं अकाउंटिंग फ्रेमवर्क। तो उसके तहत एक फ्रेमवर्क आता है, बुक एंड क्लेम, जिसमें ये सब उभरती अर्थव्यवस्थाओं में सैफ बनाया जा सकता है। और जरूरी नहीं कि उस सैफ को आप प्लेन में या बंकर में डाल के हजारों की मील दूर अमेरिका में भेजें या किसी दूसरे देश में भेजें। उसको वहीं पे जहाजों में इस्तेमाल करा जा सकता है, और यूएस में या फिर किसी भी विश्व के दूसरे किनारे में बैठी एयरलाइन उसके एनवायरमेंटल बेनिफिट्स का फायदा ले सकती है। और हम
ये
पूरी प्रतिबद्धता के साथ आइटा पे कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि ये ऐसे मार्केट बेस्ड मैकेनिज्म्स को बहुत अच्छे से लागू करा जा सके।
बहुत बढ़िया। आपने जो बुक एंड क्लेम का बताया, उसमें मैं
जी।
हाईलाइट करना चाहूँगा कि जब हमने अपनी किताब लिखी थी कुछ
जी।
महीनों पहले, डर्क ने और मैंने, तो उसमें एक हमें बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग केस स्टडी मिली, जो कि थी एतिहाद एयरवेज की, जो कि
जी।
यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स के नेशनल एयरलाइन है। और
हम्म।
उन्होंने क्या किया था कि ये बुक एंड क्लेम यूज़ करके उन्होंने एक जहाज उड़ाया वॉशिंगटन डीसी से अबू धाबी तक। उस
हम्म।
जहाज में एक बूंद सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल नहीं था,
हम्म।
लेकिन बुक एंड क्लेम के द्वारा
हम्म।
उन्होंने जितना, अगर पूरी फ्लाइट में सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल वो इस्तेमाल करते,
जी।
उतना का उतना उन्होंने लॉस एंजलिस के टर्मिनल में खरीदा। वर्ल्ड
हम्म।
एनर्जी कंपनी के नाम, एक
जी।
कंपनी वो
जी।
बनाती हैं। और
जी।
वर्ल्ड एनर्जी ने एतिहाद के बिना पे ये सारा जो सस्टेनेबल एविएशन फ्यूल था, वो
हम्म।
एक रजिस्ट्री यूज करके बाकी जितनी एयरलाइंस थी लॉस एंजलिस से उड़ रही थी, उन सबको पहुंचाया।
बिल्कुल।
सो फिजिकली आपको ले जाने की जरूरत ही नहीं है।
बिल्कुल। बिल्कुल। और मैं इसमें एक चीज़ और कहना चाहूँगी कि ये आपका नेतृत्व बहुत मायने रखता है इन सब नई चीज़ों को करने के लिए। और एट आईटा की अगर मैं बात करूँ, तो हमारा जो नेतृत्व है हमारे डायरेक्टर जनरल विली वॉल्श के थ्रू, या हमारी सीनियर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट मारी ओवन थॉम्सन के थ्रू, ये नेतृत्व हमें लगातार मार्गदर्शन प्रदान करता रहता है। और उसी मार्गदर्शन के चलते हुए हमारी टीम सभी एक प्लेटफॉर्म भी डेवलप करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, जिसे हम सैफ इंटीग्रिटी सिस्टम कहते हैं, जिसके अंतर्गत हमारी जो सदस्य में एयरलाइन मेंबर्स हैं वो इस सिस्टम को यूज़ कर पाएंगी। और उसमें अगर कोई हमें कुछ चेंजेस करने की ज़रूरत है और उसको और अच्छा बनाने की ज़रूरत है, या और उसको बड़े लेवल पे लेके जाने की ज़रूरत है, तो हम उसके लिए लगातार प्रयासरत हैं।
बिल्कुल। मुझे ये भी जानने की बहुत आशा है कि
हम्म।
आप आयाटा कैसे पहुंची। आप एक वैज्ञानिक हैं
जी।
जिन्होंने भारत में बहुत अच्छा उम्दा काम किया है। आप जनीवा में बैठ के क्या कर रही हैं और कैसे पहुंची, आपकी क्या जर्नी रही, ये आप
जी।
ज़रूर शेयर करें, बिकॉज आई एम श्योर कि बहुत लोग जानना चाहते हैं कि
हम्म।
अगर उन्हें एविएशन में काम करना है या हमारे सेक्टर के फ्यूचर में काम करना है, उसे सस्टेनेबल बनाने में काम करना है, तो उनके क्या करना चाहिए। आपकी कैसी जर्नी रही। आप एक वैज्ञानिक हैं और आप यहाँ पे
जी।
एयरलाइंस को सस्टेनेबल बनाने में हेल्प कर रही हैं। हाउ डिड यू
जी,
रीच हियर।
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल। और अगर मैं ये कहूँ कि मेरा स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट वही गन्ना है जिसकी आपने बात की थी, तो आप भी हैरान होंगे।
क्या बात है।
अ, जब मैंने अपनी ये जर्नी शुरू की, करियर जर्नी एक ऑयल कंपनी के साथ भारत के अंदर, इंडियन ऑयल के साथ, तो मेरे पहला प्रोजेक्ट एथेनॉल ब्लेंडिंग प्रोग्राम था, जिसको भारत में लागू किया जा रहा था रोड ट्रांसपोर्ट के अंदर। तो वो मेरी एक शुरुआत थी, जहाँ पे मुझे एज ए साइंटिस्ट बहुत सारे साइंटिफिक फाइंडिंग्स को एक सिंपल भाषा में बदल के पॉलिसी फॉर्मुलेशन या तकनीकी, जब विज्ञान को आप कह सकते हैं नीति शास्त्र में बदलना था। तो एज ए साइंटिस्ट आई थिंक मेरे पास ये एक अनूठा, एक आप कह सकते हैं एक प्लेटफॉर्म था कि मैं उस साइंटिफिक फैक्ट्स को और साइंटिफिक तथ्यों को एक बड़ी सरल कार्यान्वित भाषा में अनुवाद कर सकती थी। तो वही भाषा मैंने आज तक, चाहे मैं किसी भी कंपनी में रही हूँ, यूज़ करी है, इस्तेमाल की है। अ, और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि साइंटिस्ट लैब में तो नो डाउट बहुत ही आश्चर्यचकित चीज़ें कर सकते हैं, बट अगर आप वो लैब से बाहर निकलें तो दुनिया बदलने में भी बहुत अहम रोल इस प्ले कर सकते हैं। तो ना सिर्फ मैं, बल्कि मेरे जैसे वो सब साइंटिस्ट जो मुझे सुन रहे हैं। दूसरी चीज़, मैं ये मानती हूँ कि एज़ ए वैज्ञानिक मेरा ये कर्तव्य है, चाहे मैं आईटा में हूँ, चाहे मैं कहीं भी हूँ, कि जिस जलवायु परिवर्तन की हम बात कर रहे हैं, जिससे हज़ारों हज़ारों तो नहीं, करोड़ों, लाखों लोग प्रभावित होंगे, हम उसको कैसे रोक सकते हैं? और जिन आंकड़ों के बल पे हम कहते हैं जलवायु परिवर्तन हो रहा है, वो भी तो वैज्ञानिकों की देन है कि हमें पता चल रहा है कि ये परिवर्तन हो रहा है। और आखिरी चीज़ मैं ये कहना चाहूँगी कि मैं यहाँ पे आईटा पे क्या कर रही हूँ, उस प्रश्न का उत्तर। हम आईटा के अंदर नेट ज़ीरो CO2 2050 की बात कर रहे हैं, जो एक एनर्जी ट्रांज़िशन का पार्ट है, दुनिया भर में हो रही है, भारत में भी हो रही है। तो एनर्जी ट्रांज़िशन सिर्फ़ टेक्नोलॉजी की बात नहीं है। एनर्जी ट्रांज़िशन बात है कि विज्ञान को और टेक्नोलॉजी को किस तरह से आप व्यापार की, वाणिज्य की, पर्यावरण की, वित्त की और राजनयिक नेतृत्व की भाषा में बदल सकते हैं, अनुवाद कर सकते हैं। तो मैं शायद वो कहते हैं रोल निभाने में सक्षम हूँ, तभी शायद मैं आईटा में हूँ और उस रोल को बखूबी से निभाने का प्रण करती हूँ और आगे उसकी तरफ देखती हूँ।
बहुत ही बढ़िया। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आपने
जी।
अपनी पूरी जर्नी शेयर करी। और वंस अगेन मुझे 2 साल लगे हैं पहली बार किसी से हिंदी में अनुवाद करने में और इंटरव्यू
मुझे
करने
बहुत
में।
खुशी हुई हिंदी में आपसे बात करने में।
आई एम श्योर दैट ये सुन के हमें कुछ नए श्रोता लोग मिलेंगे और हमें हिंदी में कमेंट्स भी आएंगे, उसमें भी मजा आएगा। बट
बिल्कुल,
दिस
बिल्कुल।
वाज रियली गुड एंड आई रियली अप्रिशिएट यू स्टेपिंग इन। थैंक यू सो मच।
धन्यवाद बहुत-बहुत आपका और विश यू वेरी बेस्ट।
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet, there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So, please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simplifying, that's simply with an I.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our supervising editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Meera Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimain is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.